And so we, as a community full of love, are honored to have with us our guest of honor tonight. She has been a voice for decades, speaking up for social justice, environmental justice, racial justice, and justice for every single person in this country. She has been someone who has put aside everything else in her life to run for president for the people of this country. She is someone who has been a voice of truth in a sea of lies in our political system. And so here in Dearborn, in the heart and the heartbeat of the Arab American community, we welcome this evening for us presidential candidate Dr. Jill Stein.
Thank you so much. Free Palestine. We will free Palestine. They will not stop us from freeing Palestine. Thank you, Homer. Thank you, Doctors Against Genocide. Thank you, Palestine Children's Relief Fund. Thank you, everyone who's here tonight and leading the charge to free Palestine and to free us all. Because what goes down in Palestine doesn't stay in Palestine. What happens in Palestine right now is an effort to normalize the torture and murder of children on an industrial scale. And we say, this is not okay, and it stops here and now. We are looking at the end of international law. We're looking at the end of human rights, and this impacts all of us. It's not only 2 million people in Palestine for whom we now are basically on a death watch. I hate to say that, and it gives me great sorrow to say that. But that is the state of affairs right now, brought to us not only by the apartheid state of Israel, but also by the government of Joe Biden and the Congress of Democrats and Republicans, two parties of war and Wall Street. And we, the American people, have had quite enough, because we want an end to the genocide. We want an end to the endless war machine. That war machine expresses itself not only in this genocide, this imminent, precarious death watch that we're on, but endless wars around the whole world. What's going on in Israel and Palestine now, essentially, it's another Middle East war with Israel and Palestine now bombing or otherwise attacking some 5 countries, with Bibi Netanyahu trying to drag the United States into a much larger war with Iran. This is the nature of US empire. As Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Defense, Caspar Weinberger, said back in the 1980s, Israel is the unsinkable battleship for the United States in the Middle East. He didn't say this, but the subtext of that was basically safeguarding the world's oil supply so that the US would not only have access to it, but so that the US could control who else has access to it. And it's not widely known, but the US foreign policy, our military policy, has a formal name which was given to it by the Pentagon back in the mid-1990s, and that is full spectrum dominance. That's the notion that the United States shall dominate all areas of the world, in all potential realms of combat, whether it is the battlefield and the land, or the air, or the sea, or under the sea, or outer space, or cyberspace. It is the explicit policy of the United States military that we shall dominate all of those spaces and not allow any power to rise, even at a regional level. Now, maybe you could get away with that when you were the dominant economic power of the world. But the United States is no longer the dominant economic power of the world. So, I hate to break it to you, Joe Biden and Democrats and Republicans, but you're no longer the bully in the schoolyard, although you may act that way, but you're just not in charge. The world is changing, and America needs to come up to speed and become part of a multipolar world. We need to be a team player, and we need to play by the rules of international law. So many of the conflicts that we are in right now would be solved if we were just playing by the rules of international law. For example, genocide is not allowed. For another example, ethnic cleansing is not allowed. Occupation is not allowed. Apartheid government is not allowed. And we have a message for Joe Biden, and that is pick up the telephone and call Bibi Netanyahu and tell him that it is over. The genocide is over. Withdraw your troops, end the missile strikes and the bombs. They are done. Now, Ronald Reagan, a conservative and reactionary president, did this in the 1980s. Dwight Eisenhower did that by calling the ruler of Israel at that time and telling him to withdraw his troops from Egypt, where Israel and France and England at the time had invaded. And at the phone call from Dwight Eisenhower, they brought their troops home and did what he said. And the same thing applies as in the 1980s with Reagan. It was Lebanon, where Israeli troops had followed the PLO, which was the Hamas of another era, which tells us, by the way, that what we considered a terrorist group back in the 1980s is no longer a terrorist group. And in fact, Hamas themselves have agreed to a peace treaty, which Israel itself has not agreed to. So this effort to demonize Hamas as beyond the pale and an absolutely unredeemable terrorist organization is just false. That is not true. And the effort to give cover to this genocide and this ethnic cleansing, which has been the game plan since 1948 and before that. Many Jews, like myself, who were raised within the Jewish tradition, we were taught that Israel is or I should say Palestine, which then became Israel, was a land without a people, and the Jews were a people without a land, so of course this was a marriage made in heaven. Well, in fact, that's obviously completely false. And even the Israeli historians who had access for the first time in the 1990s, for the first time they had access to Israel's own national archives and were able to show that in fact what the Palestinians had been saying all along was absolutely true, that there was an intentional plan for displacement, for the conduct of a terrorist campaign against the local population. And that's where this problem began. It did not begin on October 7th. So the bottom line is that this is an eminently solvable problem if we simply apply international law and we put an end to occupation and apartheid and ethnic cleansing. And the US needs to say the financial support, the military support, the air cover, the missile cover, the Iron Dome, all of the intelligence, everything that makes Israel's genocide the US genocide also. This is a shared enterprise. And the US needs to cease and desist from enabling and conducting this genocide. So the question is, so how do we make that happen? And I think as horrific as this genocide is, and every day it gets worse, and every day it becomes more and more of a genocide on steroids, and it's just shocking and horrifying. But for all of that, the American people have opposed this since very early on. One of the early polls in November done by Reuters found that 68% of Americans wanted an immediate ceasefire and a negotiated solution and an end of this Israeli war on Palestine and Gaza. And those numbers generally keep rising. It depends on which polling agency you look at, but they are all now showing a very strong majority of the American people want an end to this genocide. So why is that not happening? Why do you see an overwhelming vote in Congress to continue sending, most recently, $26 billion to Israel to keep conducting this genocide? Well, clearly there is a terrible disconnect here between our political system and the American people who know what to do, the students on our campuses who know what to do. And a big shout out to Mesa and the students at Miami University for representing the best of us. In fact, there was a judge just recently in Rhode Island, I think, who heard the case of some 40 students who were being accused of all sorts of criminal violations for their encampment at Brown. And you know what that judge said? He said, I think this is actually what peaceful protest is supposed to look like. And he dismissed all of the cases. That's what all of the judges should be doing. And I have to say, in my own case, where myself and Kelly and our campaign manager, the three of us, were all arrested, I was accused of assault when the police were assaulting us with a bicycle as a battering ram, trying to knock us over back onto our heads. And one of the cops picked up, as we were about to topple backwards, one of the cops picked up my foot to deliver the final blow and to flip me onto my back. And at that point, and I was luckily able to recover my balance and basically wiggle out of his death blow. And he at that point said to me, I'm paraphrasing, but effectively, you are under arrest for assaulting a police officer. It was like, are you kidding me? You know, it was like, how outrageous. But I have to say, I think the Washington University in St. Louis that committed such an outrage by calling in the cops, and brutal cops who'd been trained by the Israeli occupation forces, in fact, because that's a thing now. Our police forces all over this country are being trained by the Israeli occupation forces, in fact, all over the world. It's really the flip side of a country that has become an empire. It really demolishes our democracy at home as well. And that's why they cannot tolerate criticism, they cannot tolerate free speech, they cannot tolerate the right to protest, which is what? This is our fundamental First Amendment rights. This is what makes a democracy. And suddenly they can't tolerate it, it's just outrageous. This is the price we pay, unfortunately, for allowing this, this empire to have seized hold of our government. And it's not like this is a new thing. You know, the history shows that, in fact, the US has overturned 70 some sovereign governments since the Second World War, secretly through the CIA. You know, this is just what we do, and this is what an empire looks like. But what we're seeing in Gaza is kind of the end stage of that empire. The US can no longer get away with this because the rest of the world is saying, no, don't you dare, stop it now. So the US cannot continue to get away with this kind of imperial abusive behavior, abusive overseas, abusive at home, and it's consuming half of our congressional budget, this endless war machine, which simply engages in one failure after the other in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria. The US is spending trillions upon trillions of dollars creating failed states, mass refugee migrations, and continuing terrorist threats. So the bottom line is, this system is basically in a state of unraveling right now. That means the way forward is changing. This is a perfect storm right now because the majority of Americans have had it. They've had enough. They've had enough of rents that they can't afford, health care they can't afford, student debt that they can't pay, education, which is just unaffordable on every count, schools that are failing where budgets are not sufficient, and yet half of our budget is being spent on these endless wars. So it's not working abroad, it's not working at home, and it's resulting in genocide, which is an absolute red line for so many people. So this is a perfect storm coming into this election now, where there are two zombie candidates that we've seen before. We've had quite enough of them. So what does the empire do? It is trying to keep it a secret that people have choices. And one of the ways they do that is by keeping us off the ballot, but we have news for them. We have already done 75% of the work. You have to collect 1 million signatures in order to get on the ballot. If you're in one of the war parties, your grandfather did. All you have to do is get the nomination. But if you are running with a grassroots anti-genocide party, you have to jump through all kinds of hoops. Right now, we are jumping through the last remaining critical hoop in New York State. We have a little more than a week left to collect a couple, 20, 30,000 signatures as part of a 90,000 signature burden. So this is just to say, if you have friends in New York, or people even near New York, who would like to ensure that there is a strong anti-genocide campaign on the ballot across the country in this election, tell them to go to our website, which is jillstein2024.com. They can plug in to the ballot drive and we can help them basically volunteer. It's not just a matter of signing. If you sign, you're just one signature out of 90,000 that we need. But if you will carry petitions, you can get 500 or even 1,000 signatures in the time remaining. So I just say that for you to know that this is not an impossible task. They've tried to make it an impossible task to silence opposition, especially because the American people are in a very active state of uprising right now against this permanent war economy and this genocide. So the American people are really primed for a campaign that would be of, by, and for the people instead of, by, and for the war contractors, for APAC, for the health insurance industry, and the usual suspects who control our political system. And just to remind you of how much power we have. So I want to share two quotes with you. One is from Frederick Douglass, the famous abolitionist, who said, "The power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has and it never will. By standing up and demanding an end to genocide, an end to empire, an end to oligarchy, and the beginning of an America and a world that works for all of us. We have to make that demand. Democracy needs a moral compass. Democracy cannot get by just ducking and voting for the lesser evil and thinking that that's okay, or not voting. There's nothing that the empire wants more than for you to disappear and for you to give up your power. Your vote is your power. It's very important to stand up with an affirmative vote. Being uncommitted and the uncommitted campaign is a very important first step. But now we have to move from uncommitted to committed against genocide. That's what we need to do. That's what we can do. And the last quote I want to leave you with is Alice Walker, the novelist and poet, who said, "The biggest way people give up power is by not knowing we have it to start with." When we have 68% of Americans who want to end this genocide now, that is a winning demographic right there. That is a winning vote. When we have 44 million young people locked into student debt, that is a winning vote. And we are the only campaign that will bail out the students like they bailed out the Wall Street bankers when they crashed the economy. It's time to bail out the students who were basically talked into a very bad deal. And we are the only campaign that will make all public higher education free, because not doing that basically throws a younger generation into an economy where they cannot survive without the skills of post-high school education. So there are so many groups now that we will be the only hope for on the ballot. So when they tell you it's hopeless or that you're powerless, recognize that that is their propaganda to try to talk you out of action, to talk you out of your power, because we have that power. And the key, remember this, there are going to be 3 pro-genocide candidates on the ballot: Trump, Biden, and Robert F. Kennedy. 3 pro-genocide candidates. They could wind up splitting the pro-war, pro-genocide vote among the 3 of them. If we can break through, we're the 4th campaign, which is on track right now to be on the ballot across the country and truly challenge empire for power. If you have a vote that's divided 4 ways, it can be won potentially with as little as 26% of the vote. That is not hard to imagine. It is a win-win possibility. Either way, it is a win-win solution. Whatever happens, if we get to the White House, that's great. If we don't get to the White House, but we launch a strong movement which is here for the long haul, to stop genocide, to stop the war, to stop empire and oligarchy. This is a long struggle. We need to stop that genocide now. We need to do everything in our power to do that. One of the most powerful ways of making that happen is by getting on the ballot in New York and across the rest of the country. To Joe Biden and the world machine, that their days are numbered, and that we are coming We, the American people, are coming on behalf of justice in Palestine, on behalf of justice here in America, on behalf of justice and democracy the world over. So this is what we can do if we stand up with the courage of our convictions, like our students have been doing on campuses across the land. So let's stand up together. Together we are absolutely unstoppable. Let's make it happen. Thank you so much.
Dr. Stein. Let me say, LGBT cannot endorse anybody, so that we don't all get arrested, but I will say, Dr. Stein. We are not allowed to legally endorse anybody. Dr. Stein. The law says we are not allowed to endorse anybody. Dr. Stein. We would like to thank all of you one more time for the person that's in the bottom and to see you tonight. One more time, look at them and tell them I'm proud of you. One more time, look at them and tell them I love you. I want to thank our athletics and I'm saying, #the of America. And I love you all. Look not west. Sorry, thank you for all of you for being here with us. Say it. Come here, where's my little friend? Say it. Tell them loudly. One more time. Good night, everybody. See you all soon. Good night.